Are leaders good at judging who to trust?
Well, our research shows that they're not, actually. And it's such a valuable skill, of course, because if you think about it, the higher you go on the hierarchical ladder, the more influence you have, the more power you have, it's extremely important that you're surrounded by people you can trust, or the trust that you give to people to execute, that's justified. So one thing that we see is, first of all, many people in leadership roles, because they know it's such a responsibility they carry, so many resources that they can share and are responsible for, they become a little bit suspicious. So basically they distrust more than they should. That's the first thing. Second thing, and this is a little bit of a contrary thing, is we find that the more people feel powerful, which is usually the case if you go higher and higher, you feel more powerful, they become poorer judges of whether people are just trying to be liked by them and they're not sincere. It's very hard. It becomes harder for them to distinguish that motive. So it becomes harder, and that's why actually this program is so necessary. For those in leadership positions, they need to acquire that skill.
What do companies buy with trustworthy leaders?
Research shows that companies that have a trustworthy climate, so a work culture that is perceived as they're trusting relationships, I'm not being betrayed there, it's an open communication style. On the long term, they perform better in terms of market shares. And what is very important is, again, what I pointed out earlier, the indirect effect that trustworthy climates creates is that talents stay, turnover is lower, there's stronger commitments, plus trust is very much related to innovation as well. If you want to share ideas and make sure that they're being used, you need to have trust in your company. So basically, on the long term, it promotes your financial performance because of all these effects.
Why is trust so important to leadership?
To me, it's actually the most important aspect of leadership. Because how do we define usually leadership? Leadership is about influencing other people. In our case, influencing them to make them perform better, to achieve their value, so that you are an effective leader. So trust is a key component that makes that people perceive you as credible, that the decisions you take are legitimate. If they're legitimate, people are willing to support them. This is how you mobilize teams. This is how you activate the talents that you've hired. So trust is important for the influence principle in itself, but trust is also important for the long term because it relates to reputation. If you have a very positive reputation, people will trust you based on that cue. And then trust will make that basically what you want to achieve will happen. It's called, there's a reason why they call it the social glue. It makes things stick together, that you can build something effectively.
Do organizations spend enough time and resources on this key issue of teaching trust?
No. Short answer is no. If you ask them, is it important? Yes. If you ask people in companies, do you notice there are interventions happening, there are training sessions happening when it comes down to trust? No. Hardly anyone is being trained in it. Reason why I think is for most companies, for most corporates, trust is a pretty fuzzy concept. It's out there, but it's not easy to measure. It's more of an indirect effect. So what we find is trust helps companies tremendously. On the long term, financial performance, motivation, turnover is low. And the reason why is because trust is the foundation that creates a better work environment. And because it creates a better work environment, performances go up. But you see, it's an indirect effect, which is hard to measure. And if you can't measure it, for most people, it doesn't exist.